Resource dependency theory. So with today's session, we are going to cover this topic, resource dependency theory, and the content will be shared in both the language Hindi and English. So before going ahead with this particular topic, resource dependency theory, I would just like to request that you have to be very patient because I'm going to cover every possible detail with respect to this particular theory. But it's my promise that after going through this complete session, you are definitely going to have a good understanding on this particular theory. Okay? Still, to if you come across any of the query or if you think I missed any of your points, it will be a great pleasure to receive your participations and your words on that. Okay, so let's begin with the theory. Okay, so we have seen different theories and different topics related to this particular chapter so far of organization theory. Okay, so resource dependency theory is developed by the Jeffrey Prefer and Gerlet Snellick in the last 1970s, is a key concept in organizational theory. So what it's a very important concept. The RDD is a very important concept in the organization theory. It emphasizes how organization must interact with their environment to acquire essential resources. So we need to focus there. The thing will be revolve around this heading, that is the resources. So now the organization has to interact with each other just because of the resources which are essential to them, right? The theory suggests that organizations are not self-sufficient and must depend on external resources to obtain the resources they need for survival and growth, such as raw material, labor, capital, or information. Since these resources are often controlled by other organizations or entity, this creates dependency depending to the power dynamics that organization need to manage. So I'm going to include few other important words here. So you can see I'm going to include some different kind of vocabulary so that you can use whenever you are writing any of the examination. You must use this particular vocabulary. So the first priority should be understanding of the concept, and the second priority will be reading the multiple times so that you can get a good vocabulary. So give me a moment to conclude in Hindi, then we'll move ahead with this session. सो रिसोर्स डिपेंडेंसी थ्योरी काफ़ी इंपॉर्टेंट कॉन्सेप्ट है हमारा ऑर्गेनाइजेशन थ्योरी का, और इसमें मेनली जो फोकस किया जाता है कि किस तरीके से जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है एक दूसरे से इंटरेक्ट करते हैं ताकि वो जो इन्वायरमेंट जिस इन्वायरमेंट में वो रह रहे हैं वो अपने रिसोर्सेज को कैसे एक्वायर कर सकें. ठीक है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल मानिए अगर एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है वो किसी और ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से रिसोर्स ले रहे हैं, उस पर डिपेंड है, लेकिन उनका राइवलरी हो गया तो डेफिनेटली दे आर गोइंग टू फेस सम डिफिकल्टी, राइट. सो ये थ्योरी हमें क्या सजेस्ट कर रहा है कि ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस सारे जो रिसोर्सेज हैं ये अपने में सेल्फ सफिशिएंट नहीं होते, उन्हें कहीं ना कहीं किसी न किसी एक्सटेंट पे एक एक्सटर्नल रिसोर्सेज के ऑप्ट करना पड़ता है और अपनी सर्वाइवल के लिए, अपनी ग्रोथ के लिए दूसरे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस या एंटिटीज़ पे डिपेंड करना पड़ता है. ठीक है, तो हमने क्या देखा, हर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन आपस में सेल्फ सफिशिएंट नहीं है, एक दूसरे से इंटरेक्ट उन्हें करना पड़ेगा अपनी रिसोर्सेज के लिए फॉर देयर ग्रोथ एंड देयर सर्वाइवल. क्लियर? सो दिस इज अ ब्रीफ आइडिया अबाउट द रिसोर्स डिपेंडेंसी थ्योरी. ओके, so when we go into the detail of this concept of resource dependency theory, it revolves about the idea of the resources that no organization can thrive in isolation. They have to depend on external resources for the resources essential for their operations. But definitely it depends the degree. Okay, so the degree may change from one organizations to the another. So the degree of dependency varies based on the importance of particular resources, how many alternative resources are available, and the relative bargaining power of both the organization and the resource provider. So when we talk about this particular theory, we must see that the concept revolve around the resource, that is resources important. So some resource we can see are very critical to the organizations for their success than to the another. Okay, so let's see an example. For example, if you are a car manufacturer, if we can come across any car manufacturer, they have to rely on steel industry and their components. So while a tech company, if you talk about, they might prioritize over the skilled laborers and the software tools. So it's depend which industry or which company you belong and how much the degree of dependency. Clear? I hope it's very clear. You don't need to mug up. I want you to understand the stuff and read for getting the good vocabulary. Okay? Next important thing is resources. It is very important to check the alternatives. So availability of the alternatives is need to be taken care. So when more resources provided from the same resource, the organization has a stronger position because it can switch. They can easily switch to the supplier if they need it. Okay, so when the resources are scarce or monopolized in one hand, so dependency will on that particular supplier increases. So again, it's depend on the degree. So everything is revolving around it. So resource importance, we already went through the resource importance. Then we have availability of alternative. If we have alternative, organization have an alternative, they can switch. But if they don't have an alternative, the resource is monopolized or scarce, they cannot switch easily, so they have to depend. Clear? Next is power in negotiation. Definitely, it plays a very major role. The balance of power between the organizations and the resource provider depends on who needs whom and what the quantity or the availability. So, if an organization has various alternative options, it holds more power, okay, in negotiations. That means if you have so many suppliers, S1, S2 and S3, then you being an organization, you have an options to negotiate. So if suppose S1 is not suitable to you, you switch to the S2. You can do that being a because you need a resource and you have a number of alternatives. What if you don't have an alternative? You have only one option, only one supplier because they have a monopoly, or we can say the scarce resource. Then the buyer, the person who needs the resources, they have less control or less hold over the negotiation. Okay, so what it says, if an organization has many alternative options, it holds more power in negotiations. Agree? Okay, so I hope these pointers are clear. Give a moment to conclude in the other language. So हमने समझा रिसोर्स डिपेंडेंसी, तो क्या कौन से बोल रहे भाई रिसोर्स, कोई भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अपने आइसोलेशन में काम नहीं कर सकता, वो एक्सटर्नल रिसोर्सेज सोर्सेज के ऊपर डिपेंड करता है अपने रिसोर्सेज के लिए। ठीक है, लेकिन हाँ, कितना डिपेंड करना है ये डिग्री जो है ये वैरी करती है। ठीक है, किन चीज़ों की वजह से वैरी करेगी, एक के ऑल्टरनेटिव अवेलेबल है कि नहीं, रिसोर्स उनके लिए कितना ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है, और दूसरा बार्गेनिंग पावर, किसके हाथ में कितना है। ठीक है, तो ये तीन वजह है। ठीक है, हम जो देखेंगे कि क्या डिग्री जो है वो किस वजह से वेरी है, तो ये जो जनरली हम पॉइंटर पढ़ रहे हैं ये हमें बताएगा कि जो डिपेंडेंसी है डिग्री की वो इन तीनों पे निर्भर करती है। पहला, रिसोर्स का इम्पोर्टेंस, एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के लिए वो रिसोर्स कितना ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है। ठीक है, दूसरा ऑल्टरनेटिव, अगर ज़्यादा ऑल्टरनेटिव है तो आपको आराम रहेगा, लेकिन अगर वहीं पे मोनोपोली है तो आप डिपेंडेंट हो जाओगे बहुत ज़्यादा। तीसरी बात, पावर इन नेगोशिएशन, अगर आपके पास डिफरेंट सप्लायर ऑप्शंस हैं तो आपके हाथ में, यानी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जिसको रिसोर्स चाहिए उनके हाथ में कंट्रोल ज़्यादा होगा, वो नेगोशिएट कर सकेंगे। ठीक है, और यहीं पे नहीं है, एक ही सप्लायर है, तो नेगोशिएशन पावर आपके हाथ से चली जाएगी। ठीक, तो ये क्या हमने पढ़े अभी पॉइंटर, डिग्री ऑफ डिपेंडेंसी विल डिसाइड हु विल विन। Clear? So this is currently about the concept of resource dependence. Moving ahead in this particular session about managing the resource dependency, how that organizations need to manage their resource dependency strategically so to avoid the disruptions, reduce the risk and maintain the stability. So they have to create an effective management which involve identifying the critical resources. That means organizations, it is very important to firstly identify which resources are essential for the survival and the growth. So it helps to need to cater the spatial attention and they can make a careful management regarding that. Clear? Next is diversifying resource sources. Okay, it is very important that if their resources are critical, they need a special attention and careful management. Agree? But why, if you're having a multiple supplier or sources, organization can reduce their reliance or their dependency over the single provider, and this approach minimize the impact. If one source become unavailable or they demand higher prices, one can simply switch to the supplier number two. Agree? So it is very important to diversifying resource sources. Okay, that is a suppliers. Agree? Next is developing internal capability. So there are a possible that organizations can reduce their dependency by creating their resources internally. Okay, instead of depending on the job work. For example, company might develop in-house software instead of buying from external vendors. Clear? Next is negotiating favorable contracts. So the long-term contracts or alliances with the supplier can help to secure steady access to the resources, often more stable cost. So it is better to go for the contracts, a negotiable forward contract, a favorable contract for a long-term contracts. Clear? Monitoring external environment. So this helps to manage the dependency. Yes, keeping an eye on market trend, new competitors or regulatory changes. It help you being an organization to prepare for shift that could affect the resource availability. For example, there is a ban on export, and then you have to be well prepared about these things. You have to be connected with the external environment. Okay, so give a moment to conclude in the other language. देखिए हमें जो रिसोर्स है, हम ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, हम निर्भर होते हैं अपने रिसोर्सेज के लिए डिफरेंट सोर्सेज के ऊपर। तो हमें प्रॉब्लम ना हो, हमें एक ऐसा ऑर्गेनाइजेशन या अगर जो रिस्क है उसे हम कम से कम कर सकें और अपने को रिसोर्स मिलता रहे, ऐसे स्टेबिलिटी बना रखें। तो क्या करना पड़ेगा उसके लिए? हमें करना पड़ेगा कि सबसे पहले हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा हमारा क्रिटिकल रिसोर्स कौन सा है। हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा कि हमें सर्वाइवल के लिए कौन सा रिसोर्स चाहिए, ठीक है, और उसको केयरफुली मैनेज कैसे करेंगे, ठीक है। उसके बाद हम देखेंगे कि हमारे जो रिसोर्स हैं उनके सोर्सेज यानी सप्लायर्स को डाइवर्सिफाई कर लें अगर पॉसिबल है तो, डेफिनेटली, ठीक है, यानी सप्लायर 1 2 एंड 3 एंड सो ऑन। क्लियर? उसके बाद अगर ये भी नहीं है तो हमारे पास एक और ऑप्शन है कि हम इन हाउस ही काम कराएं, इंटरनल कैपेबिलिटी क्रिएट करें। क्लियर है? और या हम एक कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में आ जाए हमारे सप्लायर्स के साथ, एक नेगोशिएबल फेवरेबल लॉन्ग टर्म फॉरवर्ड कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स में आ जाए, हम उससे भी अपने आप को प्रोटेक्ट कर सकते हैं, हमारे रिस्क के चांसेस रिड्यूस कर सकते हैं। तो हम अपने रिसोर्सेज को आइडेंटिफाई करके उनसे प्लानिंग कर सकते हैं, हम अपने रिसोर्सेज को के जो सोर्स हैं उनको जो है डाइवर्सिफाई करके अपने आप को सपोर्ट कर सकते हैं, हम इंटरनली कैपेबिलिटी क्रिएट कर सकते हैं, हम कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स में एंटर कर सकते हैं और हम साथ ही साथ एक्सटर्नल एनवायरनमेंट पे मॉनिटर करके अपने रिसोर्स की प्लानिंग कर सकते हैं। तो ये 5 स्टेप्स पॉसिबली हम लेकर के अपने रिसोर्सेज की जो डिपेंडेंसी है, जो रिस्क है, उसे मैनेज कर सकते हैं। क्लियर? क्या ये यही 5 हैं? नहीं, दे कैन बी n, आई एम शेयरिंग ओनली दीज 5। ओके, दीज आर नॉट रूल ऑफ थंब। ओके, moving ahead with power and dependence relations. So when you should come up with the question, then why power? So yes, when the organizations are talking about the dependency, the power comes. There has a relationship between them. They arise because organizations is depending on external parties for their resources, for their survival and growth. So in this context, when we talk about the power, it refers to the ability of one organization to influence the another's behavior, especially regarding to the resource access and their pricing and the terms of trade. Clear? We will going to cover the different chapter of power. That's not about it. It will be separate. Okay. So yes, when there is a high dependence, what will we do? When there is a high dependence, when the organizations are highly dependent on their external sources or a supplier for vital resources, it is leads to an exploitation. The supplier may exercise power. Who has a power? Supplier. And they may exercise that power by increasing the prices or changing the terms of delivery. Clear? What if there is a balanced dependencies? So when the both parties need each other equally, there is a balanced power relationship, because the supplier also need because they has to sell someone, okay, with a good price, the price they want to sell, with the terms and conditions they want to provide on. So when there is a balanced dependency, that means both parties needing each other for the business, right? So there is a balanced power relationship. This situation leads to the more stable relationship, more stable partnership with a fair negotiation. Clear? And the last is the low dependency. So when there is a low dependency, that means organization has a many supplier options or resource option. So the question is not crucial, it holds more power over the suppliers, the organization holding the more power. That means this allow it to negotiate better terms or switch to the provider. You can, organization can switch easily to supplier one to supplier. Clear? So give a moment to conclude. ओके, सो जहाँ पे हमने पावर और डिपेंडेंसी की बात करी, देखिए कहीं पे भी अगर हमारा किसी चीज़ पे निर्भर हो रहा है तो पावर शिफ्ट हो रहा है, समझ रहे हैं? तो पावर जो है, जब भी कोई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है किसी एक्सटर्नल पार्टी के ऊपर निर्भर रहती है, सो पावर आ जाता है वहाँ पे। लेकिन अब देखते हैं किस तरीके का पावर होने वाला है और कितना होने वाला है। तो इस कंटेक्स्ट के बेसिस में, रिसोर्स के बेसिस में जो पावर की बात होती है, यहाँ पे होता है कि कैसे एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन दूसरे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बिहेवियर को अफेक्ट कर रहा है, ठीक है, कैसे जो है रिसोर्स प्रोवाइड कर रहा है, कैसे प्राइजेस फिक्स हो रहे हैं, या कैसे टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस सेटल हो रही हैं, ठीक है। सो व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट दिस, अगर हाई डिपेंडेंसी, माने एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है और उसकी जो है सॉरी हाई डिपेंडेंसी है, तब क्या होगा? सप्लायर के हाथ में जोर आएगा, उनके हाथ में पावर आएगा, सप्लायर के पास में ज़्यादा पावर आ जाएगा। यहीं पे अगर बैलेंस डिपेंडेंसी है तो इक्वल पार्टनरशिप होगा, फेयर नेगोशिएशन होगा। और अगर लो डिपेंडेंसी है तब ऑर्गेनाइजेशन क्या होगा, बेनिफिट लेगा, उनके हाथ में पावर होगा, सप्लायर को तुरंत स्विच करता चला जाएगा, ठीक है। सो दीज आर possible dependency. So it was came up in various examination, even in the interview, the relationship of power and dependence in respect to the resource dependency theory, and you must know this particular topic. Clear? Okay, strategies, okay, how to reduce, how you can, one can plan to reduce the dependence. So organization can have several strategies to reduce dependence, okay. First, vertical integration, okay. This involve merging or acquiring with the supplier or distributor. By owning the part of supply chain, organization can secure their direct access to the resources and gain more control. You have heard about, I'm just coming across one example, that you can go through it. Various example, you have learned about that many company having a stake in another company, okay. So they are holding some positions into it. So why you have to go into the deep study about those business structure, the business roadmap? They prefer to go for the vertical integration, okay. Strategic alliance and partnership, collaborative. So with the other company can help to share the resources, spread the risk, and improve access to the critical input. So for example, firm might form the joint venture for R&D. Okay. Next is buffering and stockpiling, very important concept. So maintaining inventory level of essential resources can provide you a buffer, okay, against the supply disruption or sudden price hike. So you create a buffer, a safety zone, okay. Maintaining inventory level, okay. So this approach also involves storage cost. Definitely when you're going to store at somewhere in the warehouse or somewhere, so it costs you cost of storage and the obsolescence also, and there can be unrelated indirect cost. Okay. Next is influencing the environment. Okay, so organizations may lobby for favorable regulations, build relationship with key stakeholder, engage in public relations to create more favorable environment to access those particular resources. Okay. Next, developing alternative resources. That may be an option to reduce the dependence, like investing in our research and development, which can lead to the discovery of substitute resources or new technologies. Okay, so that you can rely less on the previous one. Okay, so this is the possible strategy from my end to reduce the dependence, and there can be many more. Okay, give a moment to conclude on this particular topic. स्ट्रैटेजीज टू रिड्यूस, हम अपना डिपेंडेंस कैसे कम करें, उसके लिए क्या दिमाग लगाना होगा? आप वर्टिकली इंटीग्रेट कर जाओ, मर्ज कर जाओ सप्लायर्स के साथ, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर के साथ, डायरेक्ट एक्सेस हो जाएगा। पार्टनरशिप में आ जाओ, अलाइंसेस क्रिएट करो, जॉइंट वेंचर्स बनाओ, तब भी हो जाएगा। एक बफर बना के रखो, एक स्टॉक का लेवल बना के रखो, भाई इसके नीचे पहुंचा ही नहीं है, इतने लेवल पे पहुंचा नहीं कि हम दोबारा से स्टॉक होल्ड करेंगे। हाँ, स्टॉक होल्ड करने से बहुत सारे खर्चे होंगे, उसके स्टोरेज का होगा, ऑब्सलीट होने के चांसेस होंगे और अदर इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट भी आएंगे, बट बफर एंड स्टॉक पाइलिंग इज ऑल्सो एन ऑप्शन टू रिड्यूस ऑन डिपेंडेंस, ठीक है, कि भाई कल को प्राइस ना बढ़ जाए, हो सकता है स्टॉक ना अवेलेबल हो, सो वी बफर एंड स्टॉक पायलट, ठीक है। उसके बाद आपने एनवायरनमेंट को ही इफेक्ट कर देना। फॉर एग्जांपल हम लेबर इंटेंसिव इंडस्ट्री है और इम्पैक्ट हो रही है, तो आपने रेगुलेशंस ही ऐसे चेंज कर दिए कि आपके लिए इन्वायरमेंट भी फेवरेबल हो गया, आपकी डिपेंडेंसी बैलेंस्ड हो गई या रिड्यूस्ड हो गई। Last is alternative. There are options to find the alternative. Clear? So this is about the strategy to reduce the resource dependence. Next is approaches. Okay, management strategy for dealing with dependency. So organization facing dependencies on external resources can adopt various strategies to manage and reduce the risk. So there are two main approaches: insulating the organization from external resources or gaining control over the environment. So, when you talk about the insulation, this means to protect the organization from uncertainty and risk associated with the depending on the external resources. The goal is to minimize the impact of external fluctuations on operation. So we already talked about buffering means creating a protective cushion between the organization and environment. It ensures smooth flow of resources despite fluctuation in supply or demand. Example, a manufacturing company might maintain an extra inventory of raw material to avoid production delay caused by supply chain disruption. Hope it's clear? Don't worry, I'll cover first A part, then I'll conclude in other language, then we switch to the B part and the cover up in the other language. Coding or tracking and classifying. It is very important that coding is the process of tracking, classifying, and organizing the information or resources in a systematic way. It helps the organizations to monitor the flow, to understand the patterns, and when it comes to these shortages. For example, inventory management system that categorize the product based on their demand and supply stability. Clear? Stockpiling or endowment. So stockpiling means accumulating. You are accumulating the resources during the plenty of availability time. Okay, so that you can use in at the time of shortage or the crisis. Okay, so you are creating a reserve. For example, a university might hold an endowment fund to secure financial stability and fund future projects even during the economic downturn. Clear? Next is leveling. You are creating a level, reduce the variability in demand and supply of the resources. This can be achieved through various means like advertising to boost the sale during slow period. For example, a retail company might run a promotional campaign to stabilize the sale throughout the year, balancing the seasonal fluctuations. Clear? Next, forecasting and anticipating. It is a part of budgeting. So you have to forecast, involve the prediction about the trend, the changes, the events in the environment that might impact on the resource availability. Okay. For example, it helps the organizations to well in advance. For example, companies have the impact of new taxation policy like GST. So they on their business operations and adjust their pricing accordingly. Okay, so GST was a very welcoming example in this case. Next is rationing. Rationing is a controlled distribution of limited resources. Rationing any distribution everyone. Okay, strategically. So especially during peak demand period to ensure fair allocation. So it is very important to take care about the fair allocation and prevent the shortages. For example, utility companies may ration water supply during drought, or company might limit their product sales to prevent stock out during seasonal demand surges. Clear? I hope it's clear. So this is part A where we learned about the organizations facing dependence on external resources. They can adopt this strategy by insulating the organization from insulating any means to you are preparing yourself for uncertainty or like risk. Okay, give a moment to conclude in Hindi. बफर करना है हमने ऑलरेडी पढ़ा था, यानी एक क्वेश्चन प्रिपेयर करना है ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को, ठीक है, एक एक्स्ट्रा इन्वेंट्री मेंटेन करना, एक बफर बनते। नेक्स्ट इज कोडिंग। कोडिंग मीन्स जहाँ पे हम क्लासीफाई कर रहे हैं जो इन्फॉर्मेशन है कि हमें सब कुछ सिस्टमेटिकली पता करें, ठीक है, क्या पैटर्न रहने वाला है, कितना स्टॉक का जाएगा, कितना शॉर्टेज होगा, हमें सारी चीज़ें मदद मिल जाए ताकि हम प्लानिंग कर सकें। नेक्स्ट इज स्टॉक पाइलिंग, यानी हम एक रिजर्व कर रहे हैं, पाइलअप कर रहे हैं, एक रिजर्व क्रिएट कर रहे हैं, ठीक है। नेक्स्ट इज लेवलिंग। लेवलिंग मीन्स कि आपने जो एक एक लेवल क्रिएट कर लिया है कि जो सीजनल फ्लक्चुएशंस हैं वो स्प्रेड हो जाए ऑल ओवर द टाइम, ठीक है। नेक्स्ट इज फोकास्टिंग और एंटिसिपेटिंग, यानी आपने प्रिडिक्शन को फोकास्ट किया, ट्रेंड को समझा, चेंजेस को समझा, इवेंट को, और अकॉर्डिंगली प्लान किया। फॉर एग्जाम्पल जीएसटी आ गया तो आप उसके अकॉर्डिंग प्राइसिंग को प्लान करोगे, राइट। सो यू हैव टू फोकास्ट इट, ओके। एंड लास्ट इज राशनिंग। राशनिंग मीन्स जो राशन होता है सबको कैसे देते हैं, जितने लोग क्यू में खड़े हैं सबको मिलना चाहिए, तो इट्स लाइक डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिंग अ फेयर अमाउंट टू एवरीवन। So, for example, a water supply. So, during drought, it should be ration to everyone, right? देखिए कई बार ना हमने वर्ड से ही मीनिंग निकालनी है, उसे अंडरस्टैंड करना है ताकि वो हमारे माइंड में सेटल हो। कॉन्सेप्ट अंडरस्टैंडिंग में हम ये कर सकते हैं, उसके बाद जब हम कंटेंट को रीड करते हैं तो क्या होगा, हमें एक अच्छी वोकैबुलरी मिलेगी और तुरंत सेटल होगी हमारे माइंड में। क्लियर है? Okay, next is gaining control over. Up now, the organization is deciding to control over the environment. How they can do that? So, by insulating the external influencing, they are creating that focus on influencing or alternating environment itself. So, the first one is prestige. Prestige is built through strong brand image, reputations, recognitions. So it can obviously, if you have a good prestige, you can enhance your bargaining power, improve your relationship. Okay. For example, if you are engaged in extensive advertising or publicity campaigns to enhance the brand reputations, making it more attractive to the partners and the customers. Agreements, again, formal agreement like contract, partnership, GVs, okay, that minimize the uncertainty. Okay, next is co-optation. Co-optation means including influential external members or stakeholders within the organizations to align the interest. For example, appointing an outside the director who has a connections with the industry leaders, okay, so that company board have a gain insight and influence regulatory decisions together. It's like a co-optation. Okay, co-lancing, that means the process of merging or forming alliance with the other organizations to strengthen the resource control and the dependence. We already covered, okay, but I'm covering it separately because we divided our concept into two parts, right? And the key personnel, or hiring a key personnel or retaining the knowledgeable personnel, it's very important, okay, to control over the external environment, okay. And last one is lobbying. Lobbying involved influencing the policymakers, regulators, stakeholders to create a favorable conditions for the critical resources and reducing your dependency. Okay, so you can just have given a most possible example, every possible places. Okay, but instead of giving a wrong example, I prefer to avoid somewhere. Okay, so I hope it's clear. Assumptions क्या हो सकते हैं? What will be the possible assumption of resource dependency theory? Because it is very important that every theory somewhere, somewhat have assumptions about the nature of organizations. Okay, so what they assume? Organization depend on external resources. Organization cannot be self-sufficient. They assume that they require resources, but they have to depend on external environment to operate and survive. Okay, these can be anything, or a raw material, or capital, and information, or labor, or technology. Okay, so the availability and the control of these resources influence the organization behavior and the decision making. Clear? So what they have assumed, they are not self-sufficient. Okay, so organizations depend on external resources. Next is the resources are controlled by external entity again. So these are the critical resources which needed by the organizations are controlled by other organizations, which create a dependency situation towards the essential resources, which is influenced by the decision and actions of external party. Clear? Power and influence arise from resource control. So what they assume in this theory, that entity which is controlling the critical resources has a power over on the company who depends on it. Okay? The greater the dependency, the more the पावर टू कंट्रोल। ठीक है। नेक्स्ट assumption is organization seeks to minimize dependence and maximize autonomy. Organization actively try to reduce their dependence, okay, and forming by idea of forming an alliances or even resource production, internal production. So goal is to increase the stability and predictability in operations, thereby reducing vulnerability to external pressures. So this is the assumption in this theory. You getting my point? Next is environmental uncertainty affect organization behavior. Okay, so external environment is not always predictable and changes impact the availability and cost of resources. Inter-organizational relationship are negotiable. So this is very important assumption they have to that there are possibility that it can be negotiated, can be modified, which can be shown with the help of power and resource control. Clear? Organization will act to alter the power imbalance. Okay, so when organization perceive a power imbalance that is unfavorable, it will act to alter the balance. Okay, like co-optation by lobbying or forming alliances. So these actions either reduce the power of controlling the entity or increase the organization own influence over the resource access. So they have an options. So these are the possible assumptions they took in this particular theory. Okay, so please give me a moment to conclude and I'll move ahead. एजम्पशंस क्या होंगे भाई? इस थ्योरी ने ना कई चीज़ों का एज्यूम कर लिया। इन्होंने ये मान लिया कि भाई जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है वो एक्सटर्नल रिसोर्स पे निर्भर करते हैं, सेल्फ सफिशिएंट नहीं होते। रिसोर्स जो है एक्सटर्नल एंटिटी कंट्रोल करते हैं। ठीक है, उसके बाद पावर एंड इन्फ्लुएंस फ्रॉम रिसोर्स कंट्रोल, किसके पास पावर है, कौन रिसोर्स को कितना कंट्रोल कर रहा है, उसी तरीके से पावर होगा और वही इन्फ्लुएंस करेगा। नेक्स्ट इज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन सीक टू मिनिमाइज डिपेंडेंस एंड मैक्सिमाइज ऑटोनॉमी। इस थ्योरी ने ये मान लिया कि भाई ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को अपनी डिपेंडेंस कम करनी है और ऑटोनॉमी बढ़ानी है, अपने आप को स्टेबल करना है। ठीक है, तो ये थ्योरी ने एज्यूम करके रखा हुआ है। ठीक है, और क्या कि एनवायरमेंटल की जो अनसर्टेनिटी है वो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बिहेवियर को इफेक्ट करती है। ठीक है, उसके बाद इंटर ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल रिलेशनशिप जो है वो नेगोशिएट हो सकते हैं, वो पॉसिबल है। ये इसने बहुत बड़ा एजम्पशन माना। नेक्स्ट इज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन विल एक्ट टू अल्टर द पावर इम्बैलेंस। अगर पावर का इम्बैलेंस है तो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एक्ट करेगी, जोर लगाएगी, कैसे? कोऑप्ट करेगी, लॉबी करेगी, अलायंसेस क्रिएट करेगी। इन सब तरीकों, इन सब टैक्टिक्स के थ्रू ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो है पावर पे को बैलेंस करना चाहेगी, क्योंकि इम्बैलेंस जो है वो उसे नुकसान दे सकता है। क्लियर? सो दिस इज द बेसिक एक्सप्लेनेशन। I don't want to extend the video sessions or the hours into it. So मैंने ना unnecessary वीडियो को ज़्यादा लेंदी नहीं करके आपको to the point एक्सप्लेन किया है, और आप फिर इस कंटेंट की वोकैबुलरी को रीड करेंगे, इसे अंडरस्टैंड करेंगे। अगर उसके बाद भी आपको कोई क्वेरी या डाउट रह जाता है तो आप उसे कमेंट सेक्शन में पूछ के क्लियर कर सकते हैं। लेकिन मैंने जितना एक्सप्लेनेशन दिया है वो जस्ट टू द पॉइंट है। मेरी कोशिश कोई अननेसेसरी या वीडियो सेशंस को एक्सटेंड करने का नहीं है। तो आप देखेंगे जहाँ जहाँ पॉसिबल रीडिंग थी मैंने की है, और जहाँ नहीं ली वहाँ पे मैंने स्किप की है। आप उसे रीड करें, उसे अंडरस्टैंड करें, बहुत ही ले लैंग्वेज है। अगर कोई क्वेरी रह जाती है तो कमेंट सेक्शन में पूछ के क्लियर करेंगे। ठीक है, सो कंटेंट इज़ गिवन इन बोथ दी लैंग्वेज। आप देख सकते हैं हिंदी और इंग्लिश दोनों मीडियम में हमें ये यहाँ पे कंटेंट देखने को मिल रहा है। तो आप अच्छे से वोकैबुलरी यहाँ पे गेन कर सकते हैं अपने रिलेवेंट मोड ऑफ जो है आंसर्स के अकॉर्डिंग। ठीक है, सो आई होप दिस कॉन्सेप्ट्स आर क्लियर। Still, if you find any point or concept is missing, feel free to ask in the comment section. Your views and your participation is very important for जो है good support. So take care, bye bye, and Jai Hind. See you in the next session.